Rain-slicked streets reflected the flashing red and blue lights of the police station, but inside, silence swallowed the cries of a girl that begged for help. Every desperate knock, every trembling voice, had been met with cold indifference. Her name was Aisha, and tonight, the walls that were meant to protect her felt like a cage. A thunderclap rattled the windows as she pressed herself against the corner of the small holding room, her heart pounding like the storm outside. The echo of footsteps on the tiled floor made her flinch, the same footsteps that had ignored her the first time, the second, the third, each time promising safety, each time breaking it. The officers, in their rigid chairs, buried in paperwork and excuses, had refused to listen. They had dismissed her fear, dismissed the bruises that were visible even through her soaked jacket, and dismissed the tremble in her voice as overreaction. But tonight, something deep inside Aisha refused to be silenced. The fear that had caged her for months now sparked a fragile, fierce ember of hope. She didn't know how, or when, but she knew someone, somehow, would hear her. The storm outside wasn't just thunder and rain, it was a mirror of the chaos she felt inside. Down the narrow corridor, a distant rumble began, low at first, almost imperceptible, but it grew, vibrating through the concrete walls, shaking the windows. Aisha's eyes widened. She couldn't see who, or what, it was, but instinct told her it wasn't the officers. The rumble turned into a roar, a chorus of engines pounding like a heartbeat of vengeance. Her pulse raced. Could it be help? Real help? Her voice, hoarse from screaming into the void, trembled as she whispered a prayer. Somewhere out there, someone had answered. And the sound of the engines wasn't just noise, it was a warning. A warning to those who had ignored her cries for too long. Aisha didn't know it yet, but tonight would change everything. Tonight, the silence would break. Tonight, justice would roar louder than fear. Aisha had never asked for much in life. A quiet girl with a gentle smile and eyes that seemed too big for the weight she carried, she had always believed in fairness, in honesty, in the idea that people who were meant to protect her would actually protect her. But life had taught her harsh lessons, lessons written in scars and whispered threats. It all started months ago, when her father had passed away suddenly, leaving her and her mother alone in a small apartment where the air always smelled faintly of old wood and lost hope. Her stepfather had moved in shortly after, a man whose charm masked cruelty, whose smiles hid threats. At first, he had seemed harmless, a friendly presence in a world that suddenly felt too lonely. But soon, the cracks appeared, a harsh word here, a push there, and then the terrifying moments that forced Aisha into silence. She tried confiding in her teachers, but they were distant, busy with grades and schedules. She whispered to her friends, but even they dismissed her fear as exaggeration. Finally, she had turned to the one place she thought could help, the police. But the police, those who were meant to be shields, became walls. Each report was met with bureaucratic excuses, each plea for intervention buried beneath paperwork and apathy. "We need evidence," they said. "We can't do anything without proof." But Aisha was living proof. Every bruise, every tear-stained pillow, every panicked night screaming into the darkness, proof that begged for attention. Yet, they looked past her, and in their eyes, she saw the dangerous message that had been reinforced for months: her fear didn't matter. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and the threats escalated. He knew the police would never believe her, he knew the world would turn a blind eye. That knowledge made him bolder, more violent. And with each passing day, Aisha felt smaller, like a candle flickering against a storm. Her mother, trapped by fear and uncertainty, could do little to shield her. Family friends offered quiet sympathy, but no solutions. It seemed as if the world had conspired to isolate her, to convince her that no one could, or would, intervene. But in the depth of that despair, Aisha had learned something crucial: fear could not cage her entirely. Somewhere beyond the indifferent walls, beyond the callous disregard of the law, there were people who lived by a different code. People who heard cries for help and answered, not with hesitation, but with action. That realization, fragile yet unyielding, had been the spark that kept her awake on countless nights. And now, as the rumble of engines approached the station, that spark ignited into something larger, an unspoken promise that her pain would no longer go unnoticed. Tonight, the invisible watchers, the silent guardians of the streets, the bikers bound by loyalty and honor, were closing in. And in their hands, justice was no longer a distant hope, it was about to roar to life. Inside the station, the stepfather's shadow loomed larger than ever. He prowled the hallway like a predator, confident that the system would protect him. His smirk was a cruel promise, no one would stop him, no matter how loudly Aisha cried. Each unanswered plea from her made him bolder, each ignored report reinforced his twisted sense of invincibility. He wasn't just cruel, he was strategic. He had cultivated fear, teaching Aisha that silence was survival. He whispered threats, promising consequences worse than the bruises she tried to hide. Even the officers who should have intervened had become unwilling allies to his power, blinded by bureaucracy or fear of confrontation. With every passing hour, he tightened his grip, convincing himself that the world belonged to the ruthless. Outside, the storm raged harder, as if the skies themselves sensed the escalating danger. But the storm wasn't only in the weather, it was in the tension thickening the air. Every moment of hesitation, every dismissal by the police, allowed him to become stronger, more unpredictable, more dangerous. Aisha could feel it in her chest, the world around her shrinking, corners darkening, escape routes closing. Her voice, once a lifeline, had been muffled by neglect. Her fear, once a signal for help, had been twisted into despair. The weight of helplessness pressed down on her like a physical force, and for a moment, she considered surrender. But then came a sound that cut through the oppression, a distant roar that made the walls vibrate. Engines, dozens of them, synchronized like a heartbeat of defiance. Some were beyond the station, they were coming, answering a call Aisha hadn't yet spoken out loud. And in that fleeting moment, the stepfather's confidence faltered ever so slightly. The realization that control could be challenged, that fear could meet force, was a seed of panic in his calculated mind. The rising threat wasn't just him anymore, it was him facing the reckoning he never saw coming. The rumble grew louder, vibrating through the walls of the police station, shaking the fluorescent lights and rattling the officers' coffee cups. Outside, the rain poured in sheets, but it could not drown out the sound of 30 chrome engines, synchronized in a symphony of power and purpose. Each bike cut through the storm like a blade of justice, the riders cloaked in black leather, their faces set with determination. Aisha pressed her face to the small barred window, her breath fogging up the glass. She could see them now, 25 silhouettes emerging from the shadows, cutting through the rain like a wave of righteous fury. Helmets glinted under the flickering streetlights, patches on their jackets telling stories of loyalty, brotherhood, and a code stronger than fear. They stopped in unison, engines idling like a low growl. It was more than just noise, it was a declaration. The bikers didn't need words, their presence alone spoke volumes. They were here for one reason, to make sure Aisha's cries, ignored for far too long, would finally be heard. Inside the station, the stepfather stiffened. His smile wavered as the sound reached him, a warning louder than any police siren. He had never faced anything like this, people who operated outside the law, yet lived by a strict sense of justice. People who didn't wait for permission to do what was right. The leader of the group, a man known as Raza, lifted his visor, revealing piercing blue eyes that scanned the building with precise calculation. He didn't need to ask who was in danger, he could feel it in the storm, in the panic of the girl trapped inside. With a subtle gesture, he signaled the others. Their movements were fluid, almost ritualistic, a choreography honed over years of protecting the innocent and punishing the cruel. Rain splashed across their bikes as they dismounted, leather boots hitting the wet pavement with a controlled force. They circled the station, engines revving intermittently, creating a rhythm that was both terrifying and mesmerizing. Their bond was evident in the silent communication, the nods, the synchronized gestures. They were a single unit, bound by trust, honor, and a shared mission. Inside, Aisha's heart raced faster than ever. The impossible had happened. Help had arrived. She clutched the bars, her fingers numb from cold and fear, but her eyes shimmered with hope. For the first time in months, she believed that someone, anyone, would stand between her and the man who had haunted her nights. Raza's voice, calm but commanding, cut through the storm. "Stay calm. We've got her. Outside, the bikers' engines roared again, a tidal wave of sound that shook the very foundations of the station. The officers who had ignored Aisha's pleas glanced at each other nervously, realizing that this was no ordinary arrival. This was a reckoning. The law they had failed to uphold would now be served in a way they could not control. And in that moment, the rain, the engines, and the rising fear of the stepfather combined into a single truth: justice was here, and it would not leave until it had been done. The air inside the station felt charged, electric. The stepfather's confident smirk had vanished, replaced by a creeping unease as the sound of boots on wet pavement grew closer. Through the rain-smeared windows, he saw them, 25 bikers, their helmets removed now, faces set with unwavering determination. Raza led the charge, eyes locked on him like a hawk locking onto its prey. "Open the door," Raza called, his voice calm but cutting through the tension like a blade. "She's done waiting." The stepfather laughed nervously, a hollow sound that betrayed his fear. "You think you can?" "You'll see," Raza interrupted, stepping forward. The bikers flanked him, forming a wall of silent intimidation. Every inch of the station seemed smaller under their presence, every shadow a mirror of the fear he had inflicted on Aisha. Aisha, trembling but resolute, took a step forward from behind the counter where she had hidden. Her voice, quivering but clear, spoke words that had been trapped in her throat for months. "Stop hurting me. Please." The stepfather's face contorted, rage and panic fighting for dominance. "You'll regret this," he spat. But the words sounded empty, a thin veil over the realization that he was no longer in control. Raza approached, his gaze never wavering. "This ends tonight," he said, each word measured, deliberate. "No more hiding. No more silence. You answer for everything you've done." One of the bikers stepped forward, holding up his phone. Aisha gasped as she realized evidence. The bruises, the threats, the countless ignored pleas, they had documented it all. The stepfather's face went pale as the video played, each frame undeniable proof of his cruelty. The officers, frozen in shock, finally realized their complicity in this injustice. There was no ignoring it now. The law they had failed to uphold was about to be enforced in a way they had never imagined. The stepfather, cornered and exposed, stumbled back. "You don't understand, it was wrong," Raza finished for him. "And tonight, justice isn't asking. It's taking action." The bikers closed in, but there was no violence beyond the threat in their stance. It was a silent warning, a demonstration of power and unity. Fear had been a weapon he wielded for too long, but now it was turned against him, magnified by the sheer force of righteous outrage. Aisha stepped fully into the light, her chest heaving, her eyes shining with a mixture of fear and liberation. She looked at Raza and the others, her voice breaking. "Thank you for hearing me." One of the bikers nodded. "You didn't have to wait. You deserve protection, not silence." The stepfather, overwhelmed and humiliated, was led away by the officers, who finally acted under the undeniable weight of evidence. His threats, his cruelty, his control, shattered in the face of courage and unity. Outside, the rain had slowed, leaving glistening streets under the streetlights. The bikers mounted their bikes, engines roaring one last time, a triumphant anthem echoing through the city. Aisha watched them go, a smile breaking across her face, a fragile but genuine smile. She knew the world hadn't always been fair, but tonight, someone had stood with her. And in that moment, she understood something profound: bravery wasn't just about fighting back alone. Sometimes, it was about trusting those who lived by a code stronger than fear, who answered cries that others ignored. The rain had almost stopped, leaving the streets glistening under the soft glow of streetlights. Aisha stepped outside the station, her coat damp, her hair plastered to her forehead, but her eyes shone brighter than they had in months. The weight of fear that had burdened her for so long felt lighter now, carried away by the engines that had thundered justice into her life. The bikers stood nearby, their bikes lined up like silent sentinels. Raza approached her, offering a reassuring smile. "You're safe now. Remember that," he said, his voice steady, firm. No one has the right to make you feel small. Not ever. Aisha nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks, but this time they weren't just tears of fear, they were tears of relief, gratitude, and newfound strength. She glanced back at the station, where the stepfather had been led away, finally accountable for his actions. The officers who had ignored her now understood the cost of apathy. The bikers mounted their bikes, helmets in hand, engines rumbling gently. They didn't seek recognition or thanks, their satisfaction came from knowing that they had restored hope and delivered justice where the system had failed. With one last glance at Aisha, they roared into the night, a wave of solidarity and courage disappearing into the city's shadows. Aisha watched until they were gone, feeling a mix of awe and inspiration. The world was still imperfect, but she realized she wasn't powerless. Courage could take many forms, sometimes quiet, sometimes loud, sometimes riding in on a storm of engines. And tonight, it had taken the most unforgettable form she had ever witnessed. As she turned toward home, a soft smile lingered on her face. For the first time in months, she felt the future wasn't something to fear, it was something she could face. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video, share it with friends, and subscribe for more powerful stories that show courage, hope, and justice in action.